that brings us to your Charlie Parker novels, because I think that private eye novels fall very much into, you know, the idea of Jack Reacher or Philip Marlowe, whoever it is, you know, someone people can hire, or who befriends them, or however it happens that the private eye acquires a client, whether paid or unpaid, is kind of helping them with a particular quest. Isn't that part of really, when you set up a private eye novel, don't you have that going on?
It is, but again, I've often felt I was very influenced by Ross MacDonald, who I still think is unfairly in Chandler's shadow. I think he was a much better novelist than Chandler was. And
he was a better novelist. Unfortunately, his biggest problem was he just kept writing the same story about fathers and sons.
He kept writing his own story.
It was.
That was it. You know, MacDonald was continually trying to understand elements of his own life. Right. And so you see these, you're right, these relationships between fathers and sons, or mothers and sons, again and again. It was that idea of the family. And I think that was what interested him, the dynamics of family life were what he was curious about. But his Detective Archer is this marvelously empathic man who says at one point, I hear voices crying in the night and I go see what's the matter. And okay, there are various reasons for doing that. You do that because you know it's part of your duty, and you don't want to see another person suffer. But in those novels, the private eye is on a quest as much as anybody else, and the private eye's quest is for redemption, again and again and again. Not so much in Lee Child's novels. I don't think Reacher is on a quest for redemption. I don't think Reacher is that introspective. But,
well, he's not really private eye either.
But he's not. But Reacher doesn't have any particular baggage, and I don't think he's trying to make recompense for something he's done in the past, particularly.
I agree.
But I think if you look at Marlowe, if you look at Archer, there is that sense of them trying to achieve a form of redemption through acting on behalf of other people. And that's the nature of empathy. And empathy is the one, I think it's almost the supreme human feeling. Whenever I've spoken to professionals who deal with troubled people, whether they're people who deal with prisoners, who've dealt with criminals, policemen or sociologists, and if you inevitably, sometimes you'll end up talking about the nature of the people they deal with, and that question of evil arises because it interests us in crime fiction, and it interests the people who deal with dreadful individuals on a daily basis. And again they will say to you that the essence of evil is the inability to experience empathy, whether you're unable to do it or whether you refuse to do it. That unwillingness to recognize that other people suffer, and that you should therefore do as little as possible to make them suffer in that way, because you would not want that done to you, even on that simple level. So the detectives that I like, and the ones that I've always been attracted to, are the ones who act out of empathy, and who do so out of a recognition of a kind of weakness and flaw in themselves that they're trying to make recompense for. And I suppose why I'm also attracted to that is because we were talking about Ireland earlier. It's very hard to... I come from an Irish Catholic background. I'm a dreadful Catholic. I'm the kind of Catholic Pope Benedict would happily see burnt in St. Peter's Square if he could get away with having the whole Inquisition back again. I'm an a la carte Catholic, I believe we're called, where we pick and choose from the menu of Catholicism. You know, we have to start, but we'll skip dessert, that kind of thing. And you never quite shake off that background, and I am a product of that upbringing, and so I'm very comfortable with ideas of recompense, and you're making up for your sins, and trying to achieve a form of redemption, because it is integral to the faith that I was brought up in. And I saw resonances of that in crime fiction, and I think that was one of the things that attracted me to it.
I'm seeing Brideshead Revisited washing over us out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
No, I think you're absolutely right. Now, how do you see Charlie Parker? Because we need to ID your guy for people who haven't read your books. Charlie was started out anyway as the lead character, although in this new book, The Reapers, it's really about Lewis and Angel.
Well,
and Charlie's there, but he's not so much driving the story.
The first piece of fiction that I wrote after leaving school was the prologue to what became my first novel, Every Dead Thing. I went through a period of just being a journalist and thought that was what I was going to do with my life, and then realized that I wasn't actually very good at being a journalist, and that I prefer to make things up, which is something that newspapers tend to frown upon for reasons best known to themselves.
That'd be a career
they're very narrow-minded in that way, I find. They just didn't understand my urges. And it was about a man coming home and finding that everything he cared about had been taken away from him. Everything had just been taken away from him. One fell swoop. And how do you then respond to that? and the choices are that you can simply lose yourself and lose everything that's worthwhile about yourself in grief and loss and anger, or you can find a way to turn that to some kind of purpose. And the early novels were about the difficulty of doing that, I think. That idea that he wanted revenge for himself, for no other reason.
What happened to him? Can you just sketch it out?
No, what happened to him? Oh, in the first book.
Charlie, in the first
he loses his wife and child. His wife and child are killed.
Right.
And he blames himself to some degree because he wasn't there.
Right.
And I think, again, that's
the
quite
idea that he could protect them.
Yeah, well, but we do feel that. And
right.
It's not just a male emotion, it's a female emotion. It's that idea that if something happened to your child, your instinct would be to say, well, if I was there, I could have stopped it.
Right.
And blame is the terrible thing that people bring with them, and guilt over it. And that's what he experiences. And he wants to punish somebody. He wants somebody to be punished. And if he can't find somebody, he'll punish himself. But somebody has to be punished. And gradually he realized it's based on what's known as revenge tragedy. When I was in college, I used to read quite a bit of Hamlet's a revenge tragedy. The idea that an offense is committed, in this case Hamlet's father is killed. Hamlet decides that he wants to take revenge, and in taking revenge destroys everything around him and destroys himself.
Himself too.
Yeah, and,
right.
and that's the nature of the revenger's tragedy, as I think Kidd called one of his plays. And Parker is involved in a revenge tragedy in that he's going to destroy himself. And just in time, I think, he realizes that that's what's going to happen, and that will serve no purpose for anybody. And gradually he alters, and he recognizes this duty towards others, and that he can actually relieve some of his pain by taking on the pain of other people. And it's also the Irish writer Edmund Burke once said that all it takes for evil to triumph is for good men to stand by and do nothing.
Right.
And in essence, I think Parker is a good man. He's flawed, but he's a good man. But I see that again and again in crime fiction. I think that's what good crime fiction is about. It is about the importance of not standing by, because to stand by makes you culpable, and makes you as responsible as the person who commits the crime. And so I'm fascinated by that, and I'm fascinated by the struggle that Parker goes through between wanting to be a good person and yet having these urges that pull him in the other direction, which is a very human thing. And day after day, we all do that thing where we think, oh, I really wish I'd done that, but actually selfishness kicks in. Selfishness is the great human sin. Most of the things we don't do because we want to do things that are evil or things that are wrong. When we do things that are wrong, we do it essentially because we're being selfish, because we think, well, I will protect my own interest before I will protect the interest of another person. And so that's why I think real human evil is so rare.
Well, I think it's difficult. I can't do Othello. I can do Hamlet, and I've never, ever believed in Iago.
Iago's just
random malevolence is really kind of a tough sell.
It is, yeah, but I think perhaps he taps into a real fear that we have.
The opera's better. The music. I think that Verdi did it better based on the story. The music can touch off some chords. I mean, I really think it's a masterpiece. He was also in his 80s when he composed that opera, and I think he brought to it, a lifetime that if he'd written it as a young man, the music and all would not not have been so moving. And some of it depends on who's in it. John Vickers was totally different than Placido Domingo. I've seen it a lot of times. So the interpretation.
You're very cultured, aren't you?
No,
you're going to make me
it.
feel kind of dumb now. I'm going to be sitting here thinking, did they do a short version of the opera? Did they do like a comic book for me?
I'm the person who writes to you for advice. So this is not true. But what I'm thinking about Parker, the way you've conceived him, he has two things which I find particularly fascinating. One of he's really ferocious, which a lot of mystery characters are not necessarily. Parker really is ferocious because he's, The other thing about him I find really good is that because he has had it visited upon himself, he doesn't really believe in happy endings. He isn't soft, because he's lived through this. And even though he works for a good outcome, he knows there really is a heart of darkness. He is not going to be
Well, he's not a sentimentalist. And it was Oscar Wilde said that sentimentality is the bank holiday of cynicism, which is one of my favorite quotes.
Isn't that good?
And I think it's very, very true. Parker is not a cynic, and neither is he a sentimentalist, because the two things go hand in hand.